Welcome to the Savage Worlds GM podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. Tonight's episode brought to you by Roll20.net, the world's largest virtual tabletop. Check them out today at Roll20.net. We're on the social media. Find us on Twitter and Facebook at SWGM Podcast. Drop by the YouTube channel, like, share, subscribe, youtube.com/Savage Worlds GM Podcast. Same moniker on iTunes, Savage Worlds GM Podcast. Subscribe there, comment, give us a 5-star rating. I demand it. And throw us a buck on Patreon if you're into what we're doing. Patreon.com/SWGM Podcast. So tonight, we're going to talk about min-maxing Muthas. We're going to talk about whether or not you should min-maxing be part of Savage Worlds? Is it baked into the role-playing game a little bit? Is there anything wrong with min-maxing a character? And then we're going to tell you the secret tips and tricks about how to min-max the shit out of your Fighter McFighterson from Fighter Town. So here to discuss it, Chris, the Savage Mommy Fox.
Hello.
Dave, the Rules Maven Scott.
Greetings and salutations.
Dustin, the Savage Zealot Smith.
Freshly shorn, as you can see.
Excellent. Great pod. Okay, so let's talk about min-maxing, and I'll just sort of start and kick this conversation off with a Discord. The reason we're talking about this is there was a Discord conversation in the Star City Savages about whether or not, whenever I take weird science, I don't like it that I have to also invest in shooting and fighting just so I can use my weird science devices. And I replied, then stop trapping them as weapons. Your bolt is a music box powered by Ghost Rock. The little tiny bees, mechanical steam clockwork bees, fly out, strike your opponent, and come back. It's all then a weird science roll, and nobody can use your own shit against you without making a weird science roll. The feedback was, that's a little min-maxy. So let's talk about min-maxing.
Well, I mean, I want to back up for a second just to the initial premise of this. If you don't like the way the mechanic for, Ghost Rock and having to build devices and all of that works, take a freaking different arcane background. I mean, this is just my inner, Savage Worlds guy that rants every time I hear this. It's like, there's a lot of different mechanics that all achieve the exact same thing in this system. Pick the one you're going to have the most fun with and don't feel constrained by. You can play a huckster and just trap it as a mad scientist.
Right.
This tastes like shit. Here, taste this. No, if I'm not having fun doing it, I'm not going to do it.
Wait, Chris, is that like the obligatory gym bag smell? Oh, yeah. Wow, that's awful. Here.
Oh, smell it. I hate playing a weird scientist. What's your character for this game? I'm going to play a weird scientist. What? Okay. Have fun.
With that said, I guess my point of view on this is that no, it's not wrong to min-max your character. In fact, it's fairly appropriate that your character is specialized in the things your character does. Yeah, you might want to have one or two skills that are there tied entirely to just the role you're playing as well. Like if your character is, a chef in the zombie apocalypse, they're probably going to have shooting, fighting, and the typical, survival roles. But they're also going to have cooking as a knowledge skill, not because they're actually using it all that often, but because it supports that role that they built the character. And, the person in the audience who I'm talking to directly kind of knows who they are. But, I mean, there's ways you can do that where you bake in a knowledge skill or two or a specific, actual skill that is tied to that role, but then you kind of ignore it after, heroic? You never go back and touch it at all, even with edges or skill points, because you might use it once every 10 sessions.
Well, right, but what about the asshole player who takes first strike, two-fisted, and then ambidextrous?
First strike. Okay. So they're going to give you the 1-2 punch.
Yeah, I mean, That's a min-maxing combo, right? I mean,
Yeah,
come on.
I mean, it's in the rules. You
No.
can do it.
I mean, it's actually not going to do them any good. First strike only lets them hit once, period, and it's a standard attack. They can't do like a right hand, a left hand. They can't double it up because of taking two-fisted and all that. So that's a bad combination for the asshole player to take. But with that said, I mean, is there something wrong with the combat monkey taking all the combat edges?
Well, yeah, man. Right? Why trying to maximize the kill rate on your fighter character that only fights and kills shit?
I think, though, if the character, in terms of their background, they're a boxer, that makes perfect sense for them to do the 1-2. But if we're talking about a guy that runs a hot dog stand, it's like, get away from my hot dog.
No, it's the Manchurian candidate. He may run a hot dog stand, but he's been psychologically, hypnotically programmed to react and kill.
How do you know he's not Thor, and that umbrella he's got trying to get the hot dog stand isn't truly Mjolnir in disguise?
Forsooth, fair patron, come forth and take a bite of the meat.
Put my meat in your mouth.
Hashtag Chris Fox, put my meat in my and if you're watching the live stream, you poor bastards, feel free to comment. Let's go to one of the questions.
Gonna be one of those nights.
I think Alec brings up a good point, and I'm completely on board with it. The idea, he states, the first time I introduced Savage Worlds to my group, 2 of my players min-max by only putting D4 in vigor and strength because no important skills use those attributes.
He then goes on to say, he follows the 7-2 additional comments, characters died in the first combat because they couldn't soak a single wound.
They could do hardly any damage, right?
Yeah, I don't know about the max part, but they did the min part.
They certainly minned. They forgot to max. No, I mean, that's just that to me, that's not as much the min-max aspect. Yeah, it's a holdover maybe from other systems where you have dump stats that where this isn't attached to anything my character needs, so I'm just going to dump that low and build high. So there's a little min-max there. Mostly that's just a new player mistake in Savage Worlds who doesn't realize just how important some skills in this game,
Right.
attributes specifically, are.
I mean, I try to tell people if you get right down to it that there really aren't dump stats in this game. You can find a reason.
Statistic.
Yeah.
Charisma
Right.
is still a dump stat because most of the GMs out there are still on the whole, I'm not going to make you make social dice rolls. So there's really no point in buying up, charisma, attractive, etc., unless you're going to actively make use of it. So if that's not something that's important to your character, charisma is absolutely still a dump stat. It just resides as a derived statistic on the character sheet rather than something you can manipulate with the initial points.
Yeah, I could see that becoming important, like in a noir game. That maybe that's not as much of a dumb stat, just because of the fact that you want more social stuff happening in that game.
In noir, I gotta say, I think one of the problems that a lot of people run into is like we don't ever seem to use the social conflict enough because we don't understand that there's so much of a social combat going on. There are some people that you can't hurt because they're so well protected. Like if you're in noir, you can't kill the mayor and expect your character to be okay. The mob will get you. The police will get you. You can't go up against like the boss or one of the major lead voodoo loas. Even if you kill them, somebody is coming for you. And I don't think people understand that enough. Some people are just protected by position. So you got to talk your way out of it.
Right. What you're talking about there is narrative consequence. And you don't necessarily come at the player character through their character sheet when you start dealing with narrative consequence. It's more of a story. It's more of a story repercussion.
I think it's twofold. It's narrative consequence where their actions absolutely have to have consequences. You bump off somebody important, and that power vacuum has to be filled. And the best way to prove that you're the top dog in a power vacuum is to kill whoever killed the previous top dog. You claim that spot by right of prowess when you show you were able to avenge it for the organization. With that said, though, I think there's a big aspect that we've talked about on the show before, which is just I don't use those rules. They don't serve the story, or they don't serve my game, or I'm not going to take that. I'm not going to take their role play away from the player. I want them to have that option to sit there and talk in funny voices and all of that. And I think a lot of people forget the whole give them bonuses to those roles based on the role play. Reward the role play, absolutely, but utilize the rest of the rules. And again, this comes down to a style question, and there's just people who don't want to do that in their game, and because of that, I've had people tell me, "Oh, well, I never take a high spirit or smarts because it's just not necessary in Savage Worlds. I never get called on to make a knowledge roll. I never get called on to make these rolls." And it's like, and that's an option, but it has some ramifications on the rest of the game if you do that.
Well, and let me step back and talk about this. I want to expound on that point for just a second. So, like Dustin's saying, hey, listen, I walk up to the mayor in broad daylight in public and cap him. I put one between his eyes. Okay, so now I'm wanted by the police. The mob is after me. Maybe his voodoo lover is coming after me. Okay, so when that shows up, what are we doing? We're talking about a combat when they come to arrest me? What are we talking about? What is when the chickens come home to roost, so to speak, and the wolves at the door from that consequence? Is it now a combat is it a mechanical resolution to that scene, or are we talking about a narrative resolution to that scene?
If you take it down to it, you can actually have a social conflict in which you take the opportunity to convince them of something. Either it wasn't you were controlled. If you ever watch, if you've watched The Maltese Falcon, there's a scene in there where they have Sam Spade and they have Peter Lorre's character, and they have everybody, and the police literally walk in to arrest them. And Sam Spade tricks the cops into making them think that they were the ones set up, that they were pulling a prank on them. So that's a social conflict. Sam pushes the one cop. He antagonizes him to where the cop punches him. And at that point, the cops can't do anything. They have to walk away. Crimes have already been committed. People were already going to jail. But knowing how to actually use the social situation, he was able to get himself and the other members of his group out of there.
And I'm going to throw this down. That is not always the player's responsibility to introduce to the table. It is entirely within the purview of the collaborative storytelling for the GM to go, hey, the cops burst in. The player goes, well, I reach for my pistol. Before you do that, we're going to run a social conflict. That's you intimidating and cajoling and fast-talking your way out of this. Rather, the player wants to draw the pistol. Great. If he tries to go intimidation, he gets the +2 to intimidation for waving a big gun in their face. But we're still doing the social conflict because that's the way the GM ruled the scene is going to move forward. And now it's on the player's end to come up with the role play that fits the scene they found themselves in. It's a kind of forgotten aspect of GM fiat, is that at the end of the day, the GM sets the scene and the players are free to react to it. But the GM still sets the scene.
Yep.
Good discussion. I just wanted to bring that up because most of the GMs are going to run that as, okay, the cops show up and then they say, oh, I pull my gun, and the players immediately devolves into a shootout with combat mechanics, and then you got a lot of dead policemen and a couple of wounded player characters.
And I'm going to tell you right now, if that's what happens in your game, it's entirely appropriate for the police sniper on the next roof to take the shot at a player character with the drop because the player character is not unaware that they're there.
Yeah. I'm going to give you a little piece of life advice. Do not pull a gun on the police. I really hate that it has to be said in this modern climate.
Unless you're
Do not.
the cop is gonna, let you get away with it. But
It's like, hey, please stop that, eh? Do not do it. Keep it holstered.
they call it suicide by cop for a reason.
I hate that I'm in a time and place where I have to say something like that, but don't pull a gun on the cops, people. They will shoot you. They're supposed to shoot you if you pull a gun on them.
Even in role playing games.
Especially in role playing games.
Maybe this is the point where you say, especially in role playing games, grass is gonna be on the floor bleeding out soon.
So I just like I want to bring up something from Art Fernandez. One of my players said D4s explode 25% of the time, but as I said, he fails 75% of the time.
Well, here's the thing with a D4, even an explosion is not guaranteed success if there were any penalties involved in that roll.
Yep.
You've got to explode just to succeed. Like you have a 1 in 4 chance of success, and even then, it's just like, okay, that's like oh gosh,
that's great. 1 in 4 though. God, that's awesome. Okay, maybe not.
So I roll my D4 -2 for the unskilled trait, and then there's rough terrain for another -2, and it's at night for another -2. Yay, my dice exploded, and I still failed.
The best part about this is that the D20 system that we always talk about, when their most recent edition was designed, they were very public with the fact that the game is designed, the player succeeds a minimum of 66% of the time. That's the way that system is designed because it's what the players want and find fun, so they've just built that in. You're now depending on something that's only giving you a 25% chance of success on an unmodified roll.
Hey,
rethink that min-max.
Hey, congratulations! You solved the puzzle. I guess you win a chocolate factory with your disabled grandfather or something. I don't know.
No, a Cupid doll.
You found the golden ticket.
Fucking Tide Pod.
Thanks, Russ. Tide Pods for everyone. Come with me.
So, I guess on the subject of min-maxing, the first thing that always comes into my mind when I hear this is, why is this a pejorative? Like, at what point did our hobby devolve to the extent that it was necessary to say that's not the way you're supposed to play? We get this all the time when we talk about, well, you're supposed to use all the rules. Well, you can't tell me what's fun in my game. Don't do blah, 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 blah. You can't tell me yada, yada, yada. I mean, even Clint Black, almost every response he ever gives when asked for an official answer is play what's fun for your players, but here's what the rule actually says. Because Clint wants everyone to use these rules appropriately at their table for the fun that they're trying to have, which means if you throw out a rule, you throw out a rule. So we have this massive thing in the hobby that says, don't tell people they're having the wrong kind of fun. But then when it comes to min-maxing, we're immediately like, oh no, you're not allowed to play the game that way.
Well, isn't that, I mean, I want to say this. I think it's a little bit of an elitist attitude from the role-playing heavy side of the community. Like, you're supposed to do things based on your character's motivations, man. Like, why are you rolling dice and trying to win the game? You're min-max. You're cheating at the rules by stacking the deck in your favor, man. It should be about the organic experience, man. I think a lot of the pejorative comes from the role play heavy side of the thing that forgets they're playing a game. At the end of the day, you're playing a board game, essentially.
I think it's the opposite, actually. I think that like going back to what Dave said about how Clint Black will say that, do what's fun at the table. A lot of times people forget that being a universal system, Savage Worlds is a toolkit in conjunction with being a system. Now, there's a psychologist by the name of Carl Dunker. I know, it's a horrible name. But he proposed this thing called the candle problem. So he gave him like a candle, a box of tacks, and said, here, stick this to the wall. And a lot of people couldn't do it because they were trying to take the tacks and stick the tacks into the candle to put on the wall. And Dunker said, why doesn't anybody use the box? People look at the setting rules and they got to know that you can take some that are there in and put some out. But the idea is that they don't all go in there, and sometimes they don't all get thrown out. You know what I mean?
To a certain extent, yes. I think, though, that's very much an advanced Savage Worlds technique.
Yeah.
That I love that we push some advanced stuff on the show, and I've been guilty of it. Recently, I've been pushing some advanced techniques on a couple of episodes. But at the same time, I think there's a huge caveat of don't just willy-nilly decide what in Savage Worlds you're not going to use, because sooner or later you're going to bite yourself in the ass. It's like the whole, well, how do I challenge my players? Use the rules.
Yes.
Oh, you're not using darkness rules. You're not using obscurement. You're not using cover. You're not using, all these different things. So your players are stacking up 9, 10 bennies in a session because, one, you're giving out a lot of bennies, and then, two, you're not putting them in situations where the benny is necessary because everything they're rolling against is a standard 4 with no penalties because you're just hand-waving all those moments. Then you're hand-waving away all the social moments that you could have called for a dice roll. By the time you get done, you maybe have those players make, let's say, conservatively 10 dice rolls all night long, and none of them were against anything higher than, let's say, a 6.
I think you're right, Dave. I think you're right. What I'm saying is that even if you do it that way, still keep in mind that the system is a toolbox with tools inside of it. Not necessarily, the people come from Cult Finder and they come from all the other different settings, and they're already packaged, and everything you just turn a page and read and you check the index. But with Savage Worlds, it's some assembly required.
And oh God, stay away from the index.
Oh,
yeah, because it makes no sense.
Well, I mean, there's
sorry, Shane.
There's also just the aspect. The entire GM section of the book does kind of need a rewrite in black to be a little more specific about how the GM is at their discretion to come up with the target. What penalties apply in a particular situation. It's entirely appropriate for the GM to just throw a -1 or a -2 on a roll, because the GM felt like it, that in this moment it required that task to be a little more difficult. The lock is rusted, -1. That's not in the book, but it's something that the GM can just throw on there because it felt appropriate to the moment. And I don't think the GM section spells out very clearly how much leeway the GM is supposed to have, because, again, we don't have hard, fast rules for so much in this system that it does leave all that on the GM's shoulders.
Right. Well, but I would also say too, getting back to a little bit of the topic of the min-maxing thing. I understand. I agree. It's not a pejorative. It should not be a pejorative in role-playing games. Just like I think that Savage Worlds takes a huge hit for the metagame mechanic of, hey, don't like the roll? Here, re-roll it.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cheating. No, it's actually built into the game, and it's a metagame mechanic of, hey, I know my character just failed, but as a player, I don't like that failure, so I'm going to spend this Benny that I get to re-roll it. Or, I'm going to spend this Benny not to suffer so much damage, a chance not to suffer so much damage. It's kind of baked in. So, I mean, I would almost say to a limited degree, the game system kind of encourages min-maxing. To a degree. I mean, especially when you start kind of breaking down and looking at edges. What's so funny, Dave?
It's a reference to the green room conversation. Art Fernandez says, but if you read these rules backwards, they say worship.
Oh.
I think they lead. I guess they can lead to min-maxing, but I think it's I don't know the best way to put this, but a different kind of min-maxing than you get with D20 games. It's not so overt and so over the top. I don't know how to put it.
It's more random. You can't have an advanced calculus degree and cheat the system because there's that level of randomness to it. Like a couple of seasons back, Scott was talking about how he was in a group and they would come across like a raiding party and they would sit there and they would calculate their opponent's like CR rating and they'd be like, okay, we've got enough hit points and we've got enough gear to just take these guys. He says, but then you go in there in Savage Worlds and you're like, these dice could explode.
There's that, but I think, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe more of what you're talking about is the whole, like the hindrances aspect of Savage Worlds. That where you put weaknesses on your character sheet in Savage Worlds become the things you're telling the GM you want to see.
Yeah.
My character has
I agree with that.
My character has a D4 spirit. Well, I should expect that I'm going to be facing a lot of intimidation rolls. I'm going to be facing being shaken and have to recover. I'm going to be facing situations that call upon that. And also, just the very nature of the system, we touched on this a little bit with the dump stat thing, is there's not anything in Savage Worlds that's unimportant. Therefore, if you scrimp somewhere, you're gonna feel it when you find yourself in that situation in game.
Right. Well, and I think too, we've also kind of talked about this too, where there's also a kind of a unwritten code. I'll say this, and I've said it before. I whenever I play, I tend to create characters that don't have a notice skill at all. And the reason being is because failure is fun. Number one, that's the number one reason I do not give characters I play in Savage Worlds a notice roll. If it's not absolutely required by a spell or something else. Because I'm trusting every other player at the table to have taken notice so that it doesn't hurt us as a group for me not to have it. And when I don't have it, incredibly wonderful things can happen.
You get to role play being completely oblivious to the very obvious thing that everyone else notices.
Right. I'm the character who wants to get jumped and have everybody have to come to my rescue, or fire a gun into the crowd and hit one of my co-players without thinking about it, because give me a notice roll to notice that you're about to shoot somebody from your party. Oh damn, I failed. Sorry, dog. Just playing my hinders. Boom.
Yeah, I would say though that you're in the minority in that in that case.
Okay, so
with the notice, which is weird because I mean every time I've ever played a game or run a game, and maybe this is convention stuff a little bit too, but it's like if you hand somebody a character sheet and it doesn't have notice on it, it's like the first thing that they see, and oh my god, you mean you didn't give this character notice?
Players are specialized in noticing whether or not their character has notice.
Exactly, and it's like, and I always try to explain to them, not everybody's going to have notice. Play the character, have some fun, expand your role play, because not every single character has to have notice.
So let's stop on that for a second. So let's say I'm creating, by Savage Worlds definition, a skill indicates some natural ability or training and experience in gaining that skill, right? So unless I'm a private eye, why do I have notice? Unless I'm a cop, why do I have notice? Unless I'm an insurance claims adjuster, why do I have notice? So if I'm building my character according to a concept and I'm trying to cling true to the concept, if I'm not a detective or a journalist and I take a D8 notice, aren't I a min-maxing son of a bitch?
Okay. So, and this is something that Art brings up a little bit, is that there is a difference between min-maxing and specialization. If you're taking a D12 in something because that's your character's specialization, you're a boxer and you take a D12 fighting, makes perfect sense. You're a hot dog salesman and you take a D12 fighting, that's min-maxing. That's the difference between those two. But, and here's the thing, both are okay and the right way to play the game if that's what you want your character to do.
I think, like, if you get down to it, if you want to do that, you really need to have some backstory explanation. So,
I'm sorry to interrupt. Dustin. Why?
Right.
Why do you need to have a backstory explanation?
Have you ever seen the movie Scarface?
Yeah, but I'm not reenacting Scarface. I'm playing a game at a table.
That's
right?
that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that point where they ask Tony and his buddy to go to this drug deal, and Tony just goes crazy, shoots up a bunch of guys, fights a dude with a chainsaw. They asked him. They said, "Do you know how to use guns?" He says, "Yeah, we were in the army." That quickly, there is a reason why he would have a D8 or a D10 shooting skill.
Okay,
He's a dishwasher.
I am not going to require my player to have that before they sit down at the table. My player sits down at the table with a D12 shooting, and then in character he gets asked if he knows guns, and that's the moment I want him to create that backstory for his character in the role play, organically during play. I don't want a novel of what this character is good at that resolves why they have the skills they have at character creation. I certainly want the player to be open to the idea that they need to have a way to make a cohesive character, that every part fits together, and not just be a random assortment of stats on a paper doll. That said, I want them to also have the ability to create that on the fly as we play. And maybe that's me demanding a lot of my players, but quite honestly, I change that demand when I go to a con because I built the characters that the players are playing, and I can already set them up to be that. I think that's one of those things, touching on what Chris said earlier, that, this might be more of a con issue. I think it's something everyone on this panel experiences probably considerably more than the average person listening to this in, podcast land, because most GMs are not con GMs. Most GMs who go to cons play in other people's games. The con GM pool is fairly small within the hobby just because, one, it's expensive. Two, it's not exactly the most fun thing if you're just a standard GM to have to go through the level of prep that's expected at a con. Most players show up, and if you don't have everything ready to go, they feel a little cheated because they could have spent that 4-hour block with a GM who did have their shit together and was ready to go. So there's a lot more pressure on that community. The con GM is a different kind of GM, and they face a lot more varied player types. Most of us have the same group of people we play with week in and week out, and they already know us as a player, themselves as a player, and we might have challenged the whole, well, hey, don't take notice on this character, or, hey, the last 4 characters you've played have all had a D12 swimming. Could you maybe go a different direction this time? You can challenge your players directly when it's appropriate in a consistent, repeatable group. Whereas at a con, it's a very different pool of players and situations that you find yourself facing.
Well, and I'm going to say this too. Dustin, I'm 100% in the camp of I want a character at the table in my games built from a solid concept. And as a GM in that game, I'm going to need answers, not rationalizations. I'm going to need reasons. Wait a minute. You said that you were a orphan child who grew up in a convent, and you have a D10 fighting. I'm going to need an explanation of why you have a D10 fighting. Well, I studied acrobats and Tai Chi. The nuns... no, that's a rationalization. Why is this nun kick-ass Sue? That does not make any sense for that character to have a D10 fighting. Now, I'm going to say this. I say that to say this. Nowhere in the game rules does it say you can't start at a D12 with something.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, you've got points. You spend them how you want to spend them. It's the same reason why characters, you'll see this all the time in Savage Worlds too. Oh, I need at least a D6 fighting because I want to have a 5 parried. I don't want to be this chump that just gets hit all the time.
So here I'm gonna call you to task just a little bit, and that is the nun with the D12 fighting versus the player who actively says I have to have a D6 fighting to have a parry of. The guy who says I need this for this derived stat, that's a rationalization. The player who says, oh, well, she studies Tai Chi in the park every Sunday as part of her meditative practices as being a nun. That's not a rationalization. That's the player creating the story of the character, and it's completely acceptable. Now, where it's unacceptable is where the player has described this character ad nauseum to you and then adds it post on and wants that, high parry, and then tries to create a story around the high parry, when really what they wanted is, I have to have this for the high parry. That's when it becomes a problem. That's the rationalization side.
Right.
And I think we do get the occasional player who tries to use subterfuge to give you a story to hide their own rationalization of, I need that, I need that parry of a 6, or I need that parry of an 8 to stay alive in the game.
Right. And Jim has been quoted before saying the following, right? We're playing a game, and sometimes you make decisions based on the game because you're playing a game. Sometimes you make decisions based on the story because you're role-playing, and sometimes you just make decisions because you're the player and that's the way you want it to fucking be. And all three are fine and acceptable. There's nothing wrong. I'm also in the camp of, I'm not too heavily on the side of, oh, you're min-maxing, knock it off. Oh, you're trying to build an effective character. Wait a minute, you're trying to build a character that can survive combat. Knock that shit off. I don't do that.
Well, see, we see this too whenever as a group, the whole, kind of geek community tears into popular culture. We do the exact opposite of it, where we're trying to rationalize why our character deserves to have a D12 fighting, but then when we see a character in a movie do something that's beyond the skill level we think they should have, we rationalize what level they should have been at and what should have happened in the appropriate scene. Well, if you wanted that to happen in the scene, play it in your game and cooperatively create that story with your friends, or write it in your book, or put it in your film. Take the time to create something instead of ripping down what somebody else is creating, and also take the time to appreciate that player sitting across from you just came up with why their nun character has a D12 fighting and a passive hindrance.
I was just going to say that she grew up in a convent herself and had a dirty mouth.
All of a sudden, the podcast references Pornhub's Naughty Nuns.
No, I was just going to say, you better be careful, because those rulers are coming at you quick, man.
You could also say, well, because Sally Field flew as a flying nun. Okay, that is all right. Yeah, no, she figured out she could fly. It's a hat. It's the hat. She had a special hat. All right. No, I just think it's interesting too. So let's kind of talk about this. If min-maxing is not a dirty word, and it's not a forbidden taboo topic at a Savage Worlds table, and Chris makes a very valid point. Well, you're not going to be entirely. It's not going to be easy for you to min-max a character to gain an advantage because, well, exploding dice and bennies. For the same reason, you can't really build a very reliable combat-rated, effective combat because, well, dice explode and bennies. But if you're playing a fighter character, then go ahead, min-max out that fighter character. Make him dumb as rocks. Give him a D4 smarts, the common trope of I'm the dumb fighter. But now, so this brings up an interesting point. So Carl and Kendricks said, is it min-maxing if you're using edges and bennies as they're intended to give an advantage, ? Or is it the GM's job to readjust the challenges when a player specializes and focuses their character?
I want to add Art Fernandez's question to this because I think they tie into each other very well. And Art says he had a player who showed up with 7 hindrances to start. You could tell him why each one was there and was okay when he said you should play those when appropriate. And I think the two things work together in that, no, it is absolutely not min-maxing when a player looks at the rules in the book and goes, hey, my character has that hindrance and 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 that hindrance. Where it's min-maxing and inappropriate or cheating or breaking the rules is when they try to take points for all of those. You only get points for 1 major and 2 minor. And with, Carlin's part of this is, no, it's not inappropriate to, oh, I'm Fighter McFighterson from Fight Town, and I took First Strike and Improved First Strike and Frenzy and all the stuff that go with that to be able to whoop major ass. I mean, let's be honest. First Strike, Improved First Strike, Sweep, and Frenzy, you don't need anything else on that character sheet, including you don't even need fighting above a D8 at that point. You're doing an AoE multiple attack against everyone on your turn, and anyone who comes within reach of you is taking an attack for free. I mean, those two things combined, you are a death machine, and don't even need a high fighting to do it.
So let me ask this. So as a GM, do I adjust and lock you in a death trap puzzle with a D4 smarts?
Nah, that's a quantum over. That's the GM trying to beat the player. That's the GM trying to use GM trickery to create something that you as a player aren't, trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I'm going to punish you for putting a D4 in something.
Now, to be fair, I still do think that that character needs to face some challenges against that D4. But that doesn't mean I build specific traps based on that. It means, oh, look, here's the big-ass door that's a puzzle. But you could also just make a strength roll and lift it. It's going to be a hard strength roll, which allows you to take advantage of all those edges, or you could make a simple smarts roll that with a D4 is probably still going to be difficult.
Right. But that character is going to be more susceptible to trick attacks and taunt test of wills or not taunt test of wills.
And to be fair, that character, let's say you did exactly the thing we just said not to do. You build the smarts-based trap for the fighter. Unless you as a GM are the kind of asshole that moves that trap specifically to the spot the fighter stopped walking in, how do you keep the rogue from being the one that fell into it? Or the mage? I mean, let's be honest. As a GM, you can create all the things you want, but unless your players fall into the trap doesn't actually affect the player, and more than likely, even if they do, they've got the rest of the party to depend on to help them.
Right.
Unless they break the cardinal rule and split the party, in which case all bets are off. Punish them.
So, and I'll say this too. So, I mean, I think part of the danger in doing that kind of I'm the big dumb lug killing machine is role playing that smarts D4. Like, as a player, your version of player knowledge versus character knowledge, and then you run the risk of swinging the pendulum too far to right or the left. Like, okay, wait, that seems pretty obvious to me as the player that I would think of that, but would my character think of it? Nope, he's as dumb as a wet sack of rocks. Oh, he's incredibly stupid. He doesn't even know how to operate a door handle, and playing it to that bad of an extreme. But yeah, I would say, smarts tricks, he's going to fall for tricks a lot easier. But once again, it's the thing of, well, maybe the player character is making that choice because he wants to maximize the fighting, killing strength for the party. It may not be a selfish choice. So I think a lot of times we look at min-maxing as this, oh, you're a selfish murder hobo prick and you're trying to win. Not necessarily. I mean, it may be like, listen, I'm just offering something that is of use to the party, but is also interesting and a reason why this behemoth would be adventuring with all these nerds. Like, it's almost a symbiotic relationship, and you look at it as a party dynamic.
So here's what I'm going to say. If as a GM, you find that play style abhorrent and you don't want it in your game, don't play with that player.
Right.
If as a GM, you find that play style uncomfortable and you don't want it to be the focus of your game, let them do their thing, but then also hit them with narrative consequences, with narrative challenges, with things outside of combat. If they built a face character, then occasionally that character gets into a fist fight because they kissed the wrong girl, they schmoozed the wrong person in a bar. You know, the jealous boyfriend, the husband, the confidant who just saw you talking to their rival and goes, "You've got a connection with me, motherfucker. You owe me all of your weapons deals. What are you doing talking to him?" Suddenly they find themselves in a situation where they're going to be assaulted in a manner that doesn't meet their specialization, whether that's, again, a physical assault, a narrative assault, whatever. That's your job as the GM to occasionally ring that bell for that min-max character, that min still matters, that those penalties and things they stack up on the character sheet, we're not going to just hand wave that stuff away. And again, I think this is a failure of two parts. One is the not following through with things as a GM, and the other part is, oh, well, I hand wave and remove that from the game, and I've left myself with players who go, well, I never take knowledge skills because the GM never calls for them. I never take these because the GM never calls for them. I would never put persuasion on my character sheet because the GM never calls for them. I want to say it was Tim Kilgore and I had a conversation about this about 6 months or a year ago on G+, where he was saying, yeah, all of these skills should be combined and reduced, or we should be given, knowledge skill points that are above and beyond the normal 15, because otherwise no one ever takes them. And I specifically called out, I said, then that means your GM isn't calling for dice rolls in those areas and indicating to the players that a D12 in fighting might be great, but a D8 in fighting and a D8 in knowledge organics was important for this particular game, where you were going to be going through a forest and need to identify all the plants that you just cut your arm on, and whether or not you just injected yourself with a toxin while you were walking through the forest. I mean, you can call for these roles very holistically during the gameplay that do certainly require the players to think a little more broadly than their min-max ideas.
Right. And I think the real trick to that, the real advanced, well, I wouldn't say advanced, the fair-handed GM response to that is don't manufacture those challenges to punish a player's min, but when the opportunities present themselves, jump on them. Absolutely bring consequences to bear when it makes sense in the narrative and in the situation. So let's we're getting kind of close to the witching hours, so let's go ahead real quick, and unless we have anything else in the group chat for the stream, if we want to answer, I want to kind of each one of us share like maybe your favorite min-maxing tip.
Complementary edges. I think that's pretty straightforward. Find complementary edges to give your character maximum benefit.
All right. Dave, any favorite min-maxing tip or trick?
Yeah, stop at a D8 and buy edges. Yeah. Don't overspend on the skill trying to get that higher die type. The edge that gives you a +1 or +2 to every roll you make for that is way more useful. And that D8 already statistically has kind of that's the bell curve moment where you get the most aces and the most successes together. It's kind of the perfect point in Savage Worlds. That's not to say that the D10, the D12, the professional edge, and stuff like that aren't great, but absolutely don't overinvest in getting that up quick. Instead, buy, I don't need a D12 notice, a D8 notice and alert goes a long way.
Mm-hmm. Dustin,
have a grasp of your concept before you start building it, and make sure that you have an understanding of how it plays out narratively and mechanically. If you're going to play someone who is a marksman, then think like a marksman. Think, I'm going to get to a higher position. I'm going to take from range. If you're going to play like a cowboy, play like a cowboy. Make sure you get quick draw. Make sure that you can stare the devil in the eye because you are used to seeing the business end of a gun. If you're going to play a face, then watch Beverly Hills Cop and learn how to run some BS.
Okay. I actually have a two-prong approach for min-maxing tip. Number one, never use hindrance points to buy edges at character creation. I never do that. It's easy enough to get an edge at an advance. when you don't spend your hindrance points on buying additional edges beyond the one free you usually get for being human, you can get put those extra points in attributes and get higher starting attributes than you would otherwise. My second point is somewhere between 4 to 5 skills max. Boil the character down to the specialization and core. What are the core 5 or 4 skills? And be excellent at them from the beginning.
Yeah. A list of over 20 skills, and he's telling you to take less than a quarter of them. It means the rest of your party can shine, and you really shine when you get to roll the dice.
Right. So that's one of the reasons
you really fail when you get to roll the dice.
That's one of the reasons I don't like. I'll just share the. I can't remember the character's name at this point, but in a ATU game that Dave was running, I decided that my concept was this red cowboy Chuck Norris devotee who was a football player. Yay, coach! D4 smarts, like a D12 strength, D10 vigor, D8 agility, no notice, fighting D10 or D12.
Had a really high throwing because he was the quarterback.
Right. Just ridiculous. Like starting off, like almost every skill was above a D10, but there were only 4 of them. So, and he was pretty stupid with no notice. So, very specialized character, but then also a very interesting player character experience too.
Also, the character that dove out of the second-story window just as if it was nothing and took no damage. I mean, there's a benefit to min-maxing those characters and then playing them to the hill.
Yeah. So, okay, so on that note, we'll go ahead and wrap up the show. Until next time, this is Jared Savage Daddy Gunning for Dustin, Dave, and Chris saying keep rolling and stay savage.